Right, hello everyone. Yes guys, today we are covering another mixtape, but let's be honest, it is one that I've been wanting to cover for quite some time, but I just needed a little bit of a break from compilations of this nature. Now originally I actually wanted to do a review on the documentary / movie Black Metal Veins, which is actually a documentary / movie about 5 people on drugs and the effects of hard drugs, primarily cocaine and whatnot. Until I realised that the director of this movie is actually Lucifer Valentine. So I thought, nah, I don't really want to review that anymore. So today we're going to cover a mixtape known as Misanthrope, which is a mixtape there's about 4 of them, so we're gonna do them. Yeah, as usual, this video contains gore, violence and many other disturbing things. So we'll get right into it without any further hesitation as we leap into the first clip. Now the first clip is very brutal to start off with. It's a clip of a boy who's maybe 13 or 14 years old. Now he's talking to the camera for a little bit, and then it cuts to this young lad in a hole, like his own grave, like a mass grave sort of thing, in which his arm is then hacked off with a machete. Now it then cuts to him on the floor as the people surrounding him start to behead him. Now as they're beheading him, he's sort of trying to grab his face and protect his neck with his stump arm and his other arm, which is still intact. He eventually passes away as they continue on for at least another 2 minutes, just hacking away at this young boy's neck, eventually decapitating him. So next clip we have a man who is sitting in the middle of a road. He's already been hacked up, both of his arms are missing, one of his legs is almost missing and the other leg is intact. It basically shows this man falling to the ground next to his decapitated arms and leg, as somebody basically swears at him in Spanish. And then we've got a video of a close-up of a woman's vagina. Coming out of this vagina are 3 large snails. And then you have this gigantic compilation of BME Pain Olympic videos, including some really horrible looking assholes, a man shooting semen out of his penis, a fat man putting a large nail through his pubic area, there's a guy with a giant penis, blown up penis, which we've seen on several occasions before. There's a close-up of a penis and balls, with some needles inside it basically being pulled out of the penis and balls. There's ants biting a guy's helmet as he ejaculates. There's just some really odd stuff. A guy inflates his left bollock. Someone's smashing down a small mallet on their penis. There's a video of a guy's helmet basically pissing blood everywhere. I've always hated those particular videos, they're just really gross. There's a man being lifted up in the air by the balls with a rope. There's a guy who inserts pins into his squeezed ball sack. There's a guy who puts a whole dinner knife into his penis hole. It looks very fake, to be honest. There's a guy who hammers his balls to a plank of wood. A guy who removes a nail from his penis end. There's a dude who puts Duracell batteries into his pee-pee hole because apparently penises need batteries to work now. And then there's a couple of really random clips, both including phallic things, which I have no idea how to explain, which is a very rare occasion for me. There's basically a helmet with a cigarette burn on it, and there's a man pressing his penis down on a cactus. Now, it becomes obvious that all of these videos were in fact filmed in 2005. Nice little fact there. And they're all from, in particular, summer 2005. What a way to spend a summer, with a little bit of cock and ball torture. So next up we've got some weird ass porn. Obviously it's Asian, as you do, it's Japanese. Now it includes this woman basically lying down, and she's covered in mealworms and crickets as she moans. I won't say sexually, it's kind of more of a creeps out sort of moan. If you're from England or Australia, you've probably seen I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. It's like a bush took a trial, except the mealworms on this woman are actually inside her vagina as well. So next up we've got a woman on cam. It looks like a very normal cam video, until she removes her pants and there's just poo absolutely everywhere. Now it completely escalates from here, and if you thought scat was bad, she then takes the bloody tampon out of her vagina and squeezes it all over herself. She then rubs herself with this tampon and then puts a poo covered dildo up her butt. So next up you've then got a man who's sat on a chair, and his penis is really swollen and weird looking, until you realise that inside the swollen up foreskin area, his penis is actually infested with maggots. You've then got a close-up of a woman's vagina with a cockroach coming out of it. We then have a video of a group of men who look like they're in some sort of cave, in which it then switches to a man who is then shot in the face inside a similar looking room to that of the Funky Town Gore video. There's then a woman who has been crushed by a large tyre. She's definitely not alive. And next up is a man who is on the floor. He's been hacked up. Is basically dragged out of this building, in which a large trail of blood follows behind him. We're then taken to a video of a man who is burning to death in the back of a truck. Could be the same guy, it looks like the same guy, I'm not sure. It then shows a man being violently beheaded next to a large tree. It shows somebody basically really going for it with a butcher's knife, in which his body is then stabbed multiple times as his head is decapitated fully. You have a woman who's lying on the floor who looks like she's been on a night out or something, in which her arm is basically hanging on by a thread. There's then somebody's body laying on a tarp, or rather bits and pieces of somebody's body laid on a tarp, in which an object is thrown onto this body. There's a guy who gets shot in the head in first person. It's somebody who's shooting him in the head with a revolver, and then it shows him dual wielding two revolvers, basically shooting this man over and over again. There's a guy whose downstairs area is all shredded and ripped open. There's then the execution of three men. One is decapitated with a pickaxe, in which the other two are hit with bats and sticks. Next up we've got a prison riot. Now this looks like obviously somewhere in Brazil, in which you've got a naked inmate whose body is basically being mutilated. We then have a man whose eyeball is extremely close to the screen, in which he starts ripping out little pieces of his eyeball, just like there. So he starts ripping this out, and then he decides it's a good idea to inject something into his eyeball, which basically leaves his eyeball looking really bloody and horrible. Next up we have a variety of clips of terrorists harming people with sledgehammers. So like there's a guy lying on the floor, in which somebody is stamping on his hand. and somebody sledgehammers his hand. It's pretty gruesome, in which they then decapitate him, and then they decide to remove his arms. And all of this is done with a spade, by the way. It then cuts to his body, upside down, armless, decapitated, hung up on some rafters, in which the body is then set on fire. Now next up we have a very familiar clip. It's the pitbull castration video, in which a man is being castrated, his parts are being eaten by a couple of dogs, in which he sits there. This convicted rapist, I think he is basically there screaming and shouting as these dogs rip into his private areas. Next up we have a clip called Half Man, which is basically an Indian man on the floor in half. Next up we have an Indian woman dressed in traditional Hindu garbs, I think you can call it. Now there's like Hindu music, Arabic music, Indian music, whatever you call it, playing in the background, in which this woman is basically sat there slitting her arms with a razor blade. You've then got a crashed, burning white van, in which there's a man trying to escape from it but not really getting anywhere, which is quickly followed by a clip of a man getting shot over and over again. And because these videos are in 5 different parts, that's how they're laid out apparently, that brings us to the end of video 1. You then have a woman who's underneath a machine, in which her leg is completely degloved, I think is the only way that you can put this. There's then some really low quality footage of somebody's head being completely smashed into absolute nothingness with something that resembles a metal bar. There's a woman who's been impaled with a metal bar lying on a hospital bed. There's a man's head lying on a bed in which somebody is wielding a pistol, playing around with this head. You've got an old man lying on the ground, in which his leg, well, his foot has been completely separated from the rest of his leg, and there's just this sort of bone just there, just jutting out, while his foot is off to one side. There's a motorbike which has crashed and a man on fire, in which a man gets up and runs into a crowd, and he's also on fire. There's somebody being held down on the ground with somebody else's hand held over their mouth, in which this guy's intestines are basically being pulled out of his stomach. I won't be doing that again, that looks a bit weird, YouTube will get me for that. Anyway, it does a close-up on this guy, in which he's obviously very, very uncomfortable and in pain. You've also got an ISIS video of a man being shot while he sits on the ground. There's also a car crash in the middle of a road, in which the camera turns to the left and there's just somebody's body strung over the side of a wall. There's a video of somebody having their head shot off with a shotgun, and it zooms in on this person's head and it's just sort of like half a head. There's a video of a guy's head just lying on a spade, in which loads of people are just sort of walking past it naturally as if nothing's happened. It just seems really weird. You've got a motorcycle accident in which somebody's bottom half is completely obliterated. There's another pickaxe beheading, but this time instead of just whacking the pickaxe down on this person's neck, this person is actually on the ground and they're basically trying to rip the head off. They're sort of, instead of doing it downwards, they're doing it sideways, so they're sort of pulling the head off with a pickaxe. There's a close-up of a woman who's been shot in the head, lying on some grass. There's a man being dragged through the streets into the middle of a road where he's eventually shot. There's CCTV footage of what looks like a man in an airport who just gets shot on camera. There's a dead lady in her underwear in which half of her head has been shot off. There's just a lot of clips of people repeatedly being shot in the head, stabbed in the head. So I'm sort of repeating myself with these clips. There's no point repeating myself over and over because a lot of these clips are just people being shot in the head and first person footage of people being shot in the head, so I'm not going to explain each and every one as if it's a different clip because it's all the same stuff. But moving on from that, there's a guy in a shooting range who turns the gun on himself and pops himself in the head. There's a man caught on CCTV in which a large truck is coming down a road. He's on the side of the road, and as the truck comes by, he sort of jumps under this truck, but instead of just being, run over, he's completely smashed to pieces. There is no human being left after this interaction with the truck. There's a man who's being beheaded. With this one, the hands of this man are at the back of his neck. He's trying to protect his own neck. But that's obviously not working, as they just sort of smash through his hands with this machete to the point where there is absolutely nothing left of his hands, in which he's just protecting his neck with stumps. There's also a man who's being led out into the desert, in which I can only presume it's an ISIS videos that do the, them words, which I won't be saying here. In which they then shoot him in the back of the head. There's another video of a man who falls off a building. There's a man who's sitting on the side of a truck. Now it looks like this truck's been smashed up pretty bad, but he's sat there and he's lost his leg, and there's basically just bright red blood all over the side of this truck. And again, there's more videos of people being shot in the head. And a lot of these large compilations are around like 10-15 minutes long, and to say there's 5 parts to this first Misanthrope, each one was about 40 minutes long, so it adds up to about 2 hours, 2.5 hours ish, and yeah, there's a lot of just 10-15 minute compilations of the same stuff. There's also a short clip where there's these dead women sort of lined up in each individual little coffin that they've been given. You've also got a video of a man whose face is completely split open. It's a bit like the face split video, which many of you may have already seen, but in my opinion it's a lot worse. There's a half body of a man who's pulled out from underneath a train. And there's some really ominous music that keeps popping up throughout these clips. And it happens now, and it happens later on down the line as well. Next up, we've got some horrible self-harm videos from this one particular girl. It basically shows her ripped open wounds. It shows her in a bathtub playing with her own flesh. It shows her licking a knife, in which I can only presume is her own blood. And while she's doing this, she's basically got the song from the Lost Boys in it, the Cry Little Sister song, if you've ever heard that. So I reckon she's sort of, not to be rude, thinking that she might be a vampire. Now this one's bad. It's basically a guy who's removed the penis skin from his penis, in which he's basically pulling out all of the muscle and his testicles from this penis skin. There's then 2 girls who are lying on the ground, in which a man goes over them and starts stabbing them very violently, and he does the same to the other girl as well. Next up, we've got a woman, legs open, pushing a full octopus out of her fanny, in which a guy then proceeds to put the whole thing back in there. There's then a video of a woman's vagina being closed up with needles, and there's basically wire threaded throughout this woman's vagina. Now there's a different clip of a woman with a very large hook through her vagina, in which a block of wood is put in between her legs, and then these hooks are basically nailed to this block of wood, and then she is holstered up by the hooks into midair. Yeah. There's then a video of a woman who knocks at a door. It starts off like any average pornographic scene. So you start off quite normal. There's a guy who opens the door, takes her into a room, but bear in mind she's wearing a towel, and then he unhooks the towel from her and stabs her in the stomach. I mean, it's very, very obviously fake. Now, she collapses on the floor, in this empty room, by the way, next to a very conveniently placed phone, in which she tries to call the police. So there's nothing in this room except her lying next to a phone randomly placed on the floor in an empty room. He then stabs her repeatedly, which you don't see, by the way. It's comically bad. And he then finishes her off, and this cat just walks in and starts licking all of the fake blood off her. And there is another one coming up later on as well. So next up we've got a bit of modern war footage. It's all basically headcams and stuff like that, and all these clips seem to be set in places like Syria and Afghanistan and Iraq. And it's basically people, like innocent civilians and whatnot, being shot by military units. There's also a man who's being stabbed over and over again, in which he's basically writhing around on the ground. And again, this is all basically the same stuff. A lot of stabbings, a lot of shootings, a lot of beheadings. There's also one particular clip where there's a man who's cut open, and there's a group of people just sort of manhandling this person's guts. I don't know, it's really just the same stuff for a very, very long while. Like, there's a guy who has both of his ears cut off and is then beheaded. And there's a bit of a switch up where you've got a penis covered in mosquitoes, and these mosquitoes are all basically sucking penis blood. And there's also a guy whose foreskin is filled with maggots. And there's a guy who has his hand chopped off and then his foot. There's also a clip where there's some body parts in a very large pot, and these body parts are basically being boiled by these two men. You've then got a part of a clip which I believe to be from I'm not going to try and pronounce it, the Maniacs, the guys who did 3 Guys, 1 Hammer, in which they find a homeless person behind a bin and then mutilate them. And even that, there's more stabbings, more beheadings, to put it plainly. You also have the Guerrero flame pop up, or part of it rather, where a young man's chest is ripped open, revealing his muscles and his skin, in which his heart is eventually torn out. There's also a similar video where a large square is cut into somebody's torso, and again the skin is removed and it basically shows the muscle and the insides. And once again you get that creepy ambience music, the horror music over various stabbings and beheadings. You then get the pictures of these 2 women along with their heads chopped off, and you might recognise the one on the left. She has been in the news again very recently. You've also got a little bit of dead body mutilation, including hacking the eyeballs out of people's heads. You've got cutting chunks out of a corpse's butt. There's just a lot of clips of people playing around with dead bodies and corpses. Nothing sexual, just, I don't know, cutting them into pieces and whatnot. We've also got another one of those weird murder porn videos, and this time we're starring a girl called Ashley. This particular clip is called Tasty Feast and is from 2003. So, you've got this creepy ass looking dude who walks into a kitchen with a woman carrying her like that, with a woman over his back. He places her down on a kitchen table, and it turns out she's actually still alive. So he picks up a conveniently placed knife next to her and proceeds to finish the job. He then takes what I believe to be her liver out, and then places it into a frying pan, and then he proceeds to eat this liver. Obviously it's not a real person liver, but yeah, he proceeds to eat this liver, and then he grabs an apple and stuffs it in her mouth like she's a hog roast. And it continues on with these particular videos in a little collection called Stabbing Collection 3. You've got the same girl who turns up in that very first clip we talked about. Shockingly enough, she's back around for another bout of stabbing. She gets a bit of cock and then dies. She also urinates on the floor once she's dead. There's also a woman lying on a table, bleeding as she's just been stabbed, in which a guy then stabs her through both breast areas. And then to finish it off, there's also a third woman, and it's worth noting that every time one of these women dies, the words die, or the word die, comes up on screen in big letters, just so you know that they're quote unquote dead. Now moving on, we also have a woman who's having mealworms filtered into her vagina. There's also a clip of a woman who's got a ton of earthworms up her vagina, in which a man is giving it to her at the same time. I mean, just use strawberry lube, it's probably healthier. So we come away from that and we finish off really with a lot of ISIS propaganda. It's mostly just sort of drive-by shootings and hostage murders, and I really just sort of skipped through this last little bit of this mixtape because it was just really 25 minutes of ISIS propaganda, and I couldn't be arsed watching it all, to be honest. It ends very abruptly with a gigantic wasp on a man's penis, and that's where we finish Misanthrope 1. I don't have anything else to say about this mixtape, other than that it was just 2 hours of killings and murders. Now there were rumours that there were apparently necrophilia in this mixtape. Was that the case? No, it's just a rumour, as usual. You had rumours with Snuff R73. I can happily say that there was no necrophilia in this mixtape whatsoever. So I think that's a good place to leave it. It was all just mindless, senseless violence for 2 hours. And that's it. I also remember now why I don't bother doing mixtapes. Fucking depressing, innit? Yeah, that's that. Thank you guys so much for watching. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.